Today on Sagittarian Matters, we have memoir comics, writing advice, and deep therapeutic moments unpacking the grief and effects of childhood abuse with graphic memoirist Emily Carrington. Stay tuned.
Sagittarian Matters, Sagittarian Matters, what's the matter with you? Sagittarian Matters.
Hello from the Sagittarian Matters Social Distancing Studios in Tahunga, California. Listeners, before I get going, I wanted to issue a content warning. Today's episode deals with abuse, and in particular, childhood sexual abuse. We're not going to be going into any kind of grisly details, but we are talking about these subjects in general. That's because I have the true pleasure of having cartoonist Emily Carrington on the show. Emily Carrington's debut graphic memoir, Our Little Secret, just came out with Drawn and Quarterly. They describe it as a testament to survival and to the importance of telling your story your way. The book details a time in Emily's life where she was sexually abused by a neighbor and family friend. As soon as I got this book, I lent it to as many cartoonists as I could, and they all loved it. And so I hope that you really like this interview with Emily. Emily's very wise, and to me, our conversation yielded a lot of interesting points about drawing comics, writing comics, healing, grief, and how to support survivors of abuse in your life. Now, please enjoy my talk with new friend to the show, graphic memoirist Emily Carrington.
I would describe the book as a journey that I went on to get away from the effects of what it was something that had been weighing on me for years and years. And the book was a journey I took to come to terms with it and to deal with it. And the book was the way I dealt with it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, can I ask, because I read an interview where you spoke about taking different healing paths.
Yes.
Before you came to the book. So what paths did you take amongst the ones you feel like talking about? And then how did you come to this medium or this idea of like, you know what, I'm going to spend a really long time drawing each of these experiences out?
Well, I wasn't feeling very good about myself and my life, and went into therapy for about a year and a half, and that was very helpful and very difficult and very helpful and very important. And it sort of took me partway there, but it was something that was weighing on me. The length of the lawsuit that I got into was taking so long that I think was the part that felt the most crushing, was that I was hoping that the lawsuit was going to bring me some closure. And it was taking years and years, and I wasn't getting any. And it was a feeling of being slowly crushed by a giant weight, and there didn't seem to be any way out of it. And I tried to write poetry. I tried to write short creative nonfiction, and that expressed some of my feelings about it. But I still felt this weight. And it was finally when I took some courses at Langara College in Vancouver that after I became interested in comics again, and once it was a classroom exercise basically that I did. It was one of our term projects, which I think was 10 to 12 pages. And I just started. I said, okay, I've been in these classes for a while, and I talked to the other students, and I said, this is a hard topic. Are you okay with me doing this? And it was a small class, and they all said yes. So I sort of delved into it in this short piece that ended up being the first 10 or 12 pages of the book, and just allowed myself to free associate whatever came out, and I found that was the way for me to let the story out. It wasn't so much that I wrote the story, is that I let the story out. It was like I opened up a door, and whatever came out, I wrote it down.
That first story was about flies,
Yes.
where in the cabin where you lived with your
Yes.
father. And
Yes.
it was so perfect. It felt like you were channeling for some, for lack of a better word, because it felt like you really got the dialogue of your dad and the way you portray so many tiny details from that time in your life really fill out all the characters, and it really fills everything out. And it feels your dad himself is, the way that you attributed dialogue to him, like the way he speaks is so
Yeah.
particular. And like
Yes.
everybody in the book has such a particular voice.
Yes. That is because, first of all, Dad, he passed away a couple of years ago, but he had a very particular way of talking and British and waving his arms and ranting about this and that, and very, very distinct. And also with Richard, who's the character of who molested me, he had a particular way of talking too. And it's been, I don't know, I forget how many years now since it happened, like 35 or 40 or some ridiculously long time ago. But I kept diaries at the time. And so I wrote, and I really enjoyed writing. So I kept detailed diaries with exact words of what he said. So I was able to capture, to give him a different personality. I don't really remember a lot of exact details about everything he said. But when I go back to my diary and I wrote down word for word what he said, I transferred that as much as I could into the book, word for word. So when you read Richard's dialogue in the book, with very few exceptions, you were reading exactly what he said back in 1982. So that is going to, that helps to capture him as a personality in the book, and other people in the book as well have distinct ways of talking. And I think that helped keep the characters very distinct and separate.
It really was effective.
Good. I'm really glad.
I also felt like you were very fair to your father in a way, because there was this sense in the book. So you're living in the country with your father, and Richard is a neighbor, and he turns out to be more and more helpful and kind of incorporating you into his life and giving you work and giving you a place to have a hot shower and then taking advantage of his position. And we see, as readers, we're like, oh, her dad's going to come in and protect her because that's part of his job. And he really just doesn't.
Yes.
But I wonder, how did you approach, because how long, I don't know how long this book took you to write, but I'm assuming you started writing it while your father was still alive.
No, actually.
Oh.
I started writing it in, no, I think he might have passed away by then. I'm not sure.
Oh, wow.
But I wrote it very quickly.
You're so fast at drawing.
Well, it's because I didn't have to write the story. It just came out.
Yeah.
And I used a fairly simple drawing style. If I'd had to color it, it would be another 5 years or something. But it was partly the style and partly the fact that I never really wrote the story. It just came out.
Wow.
But sorry, your question was about my dad, right?
Oh yeah, I guess I wondered how you approached writing about your dad, and how you approach writing about the family around you that were still your family, but also didn't protect you when this thing was happening.
I sort of tried to approach the book, the whole book, in the same way, like whether it was my family or not. So what's lacking is child sexual abuse is never documented because it's always done in secret. So there are no videos of it unless that's what they're into, making videos. But in general, there's not going to be a video of it. So what I was trying to make was a video of it. Now I can't do that because I don't have a time machine. But what I was trying to do is just document what happened. So I used the words of the time. I would look up the date and I'd find out whether it was snowing or not, and I'd put the snow in. In one panel, I I looked up the phase of the moon, so I would draw the moon in its correct phase. So I was trying to make it a video. So dealing with my parents is kind of the same. I was trying to step back a little bit and just show what happened. And every part of it has good sides and bad sides. You know, if there's a piano teacher or somebody in the church who molests a child, they need to be seen as a good person first in order to do that. They have to gain the trust. And the other thing is although my parents lacked what we might think of as normal parenting skills, in reality, there's no doubt in my mind that they tried, that they really did try. And there was just something wasn't quite right. But I do believe they really tried.
I think it's really fair of you to show the ways that they tried, because I also believe, as somebody with imperfect parentage, that, you know, given my mom's resources, she was doing her best, whether or not I agree with.
Yes, yes.
I
tell people that in general, I believe people do their best. It's sometimes people's best isn't really that great.
Exactly.
But it probably is their best, you know.
It's unfortunate that each of us got assigned to people who had those as their best.
Yes. Makes for good books, though.
It's just incredible.
If you want to look at the silver lining.
Well, I guess I wonder, and I don't know, as a memoirist, I don't know if I have a wonderful answer for this, but I wonder how you took care of yourself as you were going through this process of channeling or drawing this book and kind of really immersing yourself in these almost photographic depictions of things.
I didn't really, because I couldn't cling to anything. It's like, if you're going to swim across the ocean, you can't hold on to the shore at all. You know, you got to just go straight out into the ocean and hope you make it. I tried to get a psychologist to help me get through it. And after 4 or 5 sessions, he tried to convince me to go into group therapy and not to write my book. So that was not what I wanted, because I asked him, I said, look, I need someone to help me get through this book, because I'm going to go into some really creepy, dark places. And it's going to be difficult, and I'm scared what might happen to me. So I never went back. And I was so kind of shocked at what had happened that I didn't try to find anybody else to help me. So I'd already started the book, and it was like a process, and I'd already let part of it out, and I couldn't stop at that point. So I just literally not really locked myself in, but it happened to coincide with the start of some of the pandemic. So I just basically stayed home and immersed myself in this world and hoped that it turned out. And it did, but it was rough in a few spots, I'd have to say.
Yeah. I've told my friends before, or students too, that like doing a book where I'm having to draw a traumatic thing and go into it feels a little bit like being Frodo in Lord of the Rings and like putting on the ring when like it's just like screaming and wraiths and like you're the only one who can see it, and then you come out of it and you're kind of shell shocked.
Yes.
How did you choose where to have Richard's face be kind of a scribbled blur and when to articulate his face? And also I felt very satisfied with how his face looked, because he looked so unpleasant. And I know it's really hard to draw people who are horrible to you.
Yes. Even though I was 15, so, you know, relatively old, it wasn't like I was 5, I still was very intimidated by Richard, and I still felt like a child around him. And so when I first drew the book, you notice the first part you were talking about with the flies in it, that was the section I drew for the class at Langara College. For that section, I didn't draw his face at all because it was too difficult. It was too creepy and too intense, I guess is the word is, and too uncomfortable. So I just scribbled over where his face would be. And it just became this scribbled blur, like I wanted to scrape it out almost with my pen. Later on, when I got further along in the book, I became able to draw his face. It took a long time. And when I began to draw his face, I drew it partly as he looked and partly how he made me feel. So it doesn't look exactly like him, but what it does is it looks exactly like he looked to me at the time. So when you're a kid, adults look very hairy. They look wrinkly and hairy and big, and there's weird lines everywhere that kids don't have. So those are all the things that stood out for me. And the closer he got to me physically, the bigger and the creepier and scarier those things looked. So I tried to incorporate that into how I drew him. Now, as to later on in the book, when I was more able to draw him without getting, too creeped out, I don't know even the right word for it. That was basically just how I felt at the time. I would go to draw something, and if I felt like scribbling where his face was, again, it might sound funny, but I didn't put a whole lot of thought into the book. I just allowed it to come out, and sometimes it came out like that, with as just scribbles with the pen, and sometimes it would come out as his actual face. And for the most part, it stayed the same when I went to do the final copy.
We have a listener question. We have two questions. One is from, and they may be linked, and you may not have an answer for this because you may not have had to do this, but a listener on Instagram asks, what do major revisions look like in your process, especially if significant art is done? Did you have major revisions?
Not really. What I did was drew the whole thing out. I sketched it out on photocopy paper with a pencil, because that was the way I could do it. I could do it as fast as I can and just let the story come out as quick as possible without wasting expensive materials. So that was the first step, was the paper and the pencil. And then I would draw it out on 11 by 14 Bristol. But I did the book in about 17 sections, which later the editor decided to put it down into fewer sections. But so it was in anywhere from 5 to 15 page sections. So each one of those sections, I would figure out how it was going to be. And I had one of my instructors from Langara College, who also did some editing work, helped me with page design. So deciding which panels went where and what size they were and stuff. So by the time I went to do the final story, I was fairly sure where I wanted things. After the Drawn and Quarterly helped me with some final editing. And there were a few things they asked me to change. And in some cases, I would draw the page over, not very many pages though. And in some cases, I bought I think it was a Huion Canvas Pro 12 or something. So some little tablet. And I would scan in my pictures. If it was just some minor changes, I would scan in the page. And then it was simple line work. So I would erase the line and I would draw a new line. And it wasn't too bad. There were a few weeks of revisions, but a lot of it was tidying up my lettering, which once I scanned it, I realized was kind of messy. So it wasn't that bad. I'm in my mid-50s now and trying something completely different, and no idea if it was going to appeal to people, or I just kind of hoping it would, I guess.
It's so powerful. And I know, through all these things, there's so many moments of disempowerment for your
Yes.
character. And even just the waiting for your lawsuit against Richard to come to fruition. I feel like even just you sitting down and like just needing a venue to tell this story out loud, it feels really powerful. And it feels like
Yeah.
you did.
I didn't know, everything else I tried had failed, is basically what it came down to. And this worked. So as a way to tell a story. But the reason I did it is because everything else I tried failed. And this is all I had left. So
I feel so grateful and lucky that you did. There's
thank you.
You're welcome. So there's a part of the book where you're kind of laying out what happened in memories. And there's a part of the book where you as an adult are able to really visually articulate, I don't know if it's, your inner child or some inner version of yourself who's kind of stuck, or like these souls of traumatized kids who are
Yes.
stuck. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, it's an image that came into my head, so I drew it. I know this is probably going to be my answer to everything that you asked.
That's a good answer. That's true.
But it's literally just the images that came into my head as I was drawing and seeing. I see it. It's like a movie that was playing out in front of me that I drew, and I literally saw a cave full of these scrawny, miserable, sunshine deprived, Gollum-like children in just all sitting in a cave and realizing that I sort of had that person, like there was the inner, I guess you call it the inner child. Myself felt like they were stuck in a cave, and seeing that image, I just felt like there are so. And the thing is I walked around for 25 or 30 years not even knowing it. And I think the reason I use that image is there are people all over that have the effects of child sexual abuse affecting their life every single day, and they don't know it. They have this part of themselves that they've separated off and locked away to keep safe, but it affects your life. And you don't know it because you can't see it. And it isn't until you see it with your own eyes that you believe it. And so I guess that was just feeling bad for all the people that are living with the effects of child sexual abuse and not knowing it, and how it drags you down and affects your life and takes away the things you could have accomplished and the relationships you could have had and all the things it robs from you. And I guess that's what I was thinking about, those people and that part of them that they've walled off to protect.
Today's episode is brought to you by Steph Choi, Shoshana Ruth Wechter, and Joey Soloway. If you would like to support Sagittarian Matters, in particular producer Chris Sutton, please send $5, $5 million, that's your business, via PayPal to hornetleg@gmail.com. Or, this just in, he's got a Venmo, Hell Books. That's HE double hockey sticks books. Thank you for your support, and we look forward to saying your name on the podcast. Producer Ponyo looks forward to it too. Don't be scared, that's just Ponyo's speaking voice.
You illustrated the effects very beautifully of somebody kind of pushing you off the normal, easy path of life, and then you
Yes.
having to try and trudge your way back through a lot of impediments.
Yes. So I use my story as an example. The detail is the detail of my story, but the basic structure is the same for most, I would say, victims of child sexual abuse. So if you're molested as a kid and you don't have somebody to tell and you don't get it resolved and you don't do whatever you need to do to fix it up, which I didn't, of course, then you still have to go to school and go to work and try to find somebody to have a family with go on vacations and do everything else that normal people do. But you have this thing weighing you down, and this everything like obstacles. And that was, my trajectory in life was the same. But the analogy I used in the book was that before I was on a road, and I said, not a great road, it wasn't a super road, but it was a road. And then Richard knocked me off the road, and I was sort of going through the brush and the swamp, and I still had the same, basic goals and ideas I did as before Richard molested me, but I was messed up, and that made almost everything I tried to do harder. And that was that thing. And it's not even just the stuff in your own individual life. Sadly, when you're molested, and I imagine a lot of molested children feel this way, you lose faith in your parents because they should have protected you. That's the reasoning. Even if they have no idea what's going on and they didn't do anything to put you into harm's way, you still blame them for not protecting you and making it stop. So you lose faith in them, and they used to be all powerful. And now the abuser is the most powerful person in the world. They're more powerful than your parents, your teacher, the police. They're the most powerful person in the world. So you lose faith in all those other people that could be there to help you, that you could go up to and say, I need help. Some part of you loses faith in them. And so that's another thing, is it doesn't just make your life harder, it makes it harder to get help.
Yeah. It almost seems like almost like somebody kind of like you got hit by another car that like made the tire of your car kind of wonky, and then you're trying to get on the highway and you just have to overcorrect all the time to try not to just go into a ditch.
Yes. That's exactly.
It's just like you have this one wobbly tire.
Yeah. That's I never thought about that, but yeah, that fits really well.
It's just like you had to overcome so much and be so persistent to even be here today. It seems from this. Okay. I think one of the last couple of things I want to talk about are there's a really beautiful way that you were able to put words to the feeling of kind of turning abuse in on yourself, that you were able to, I don't know if it's like the amount of therapy or the amount of time that's gone by or the perspective you have, but there's that feeling when you've been abused where it almost feels like, oh, well, I deserved that, or I didn't deserve to get protected, or whatever the bad feelings that people take on when they're abused. You were able to kind of name those feelings and show how that process worked. And then that leads us, towards the end of the book. Not only do you talk about a little bit like, if you suspect somebody being sexually abused, what are some things to do? Or if you are being sexually abused, but also just the idea that it doesn't make you bad to have been hurt.
Yes.
How did you even come to that? Like, how long did it take you to even get to that place?
Well, I'm gonna say it again. It just kind of came to me.
Just came. Yeah.
So there are parts of the book that I didn't know until 3 or 4 panels. I didn't have a plot. I didn't know until 3 or 4 panels what was going to happen. So it wasn't until the characters, which are sort of like this, almost like this movie I was watching and drawing as it was happening, they just said stuff. And one of them, I guess, said that it isn't your fault. It isn't. It's literally just how the story came to me. And a lot of the process of writing this book was writing the book and then going back and reading it and trying to figure out what it meant, because I didn't know what it meant before I wrote it in a lot of the cases. So that's literally just what they said. And for some reason, the story tied together at the end. And that wasn't my own doing. It's literally how it came out of me. So I can't explain it. It's for me though, writing it, I felt a little bit like I just went into my head someplace and found a little door, and I opened up the door and then stuff came out, and I just let it come out in a way that was, I could write it down. So I'd sit down and whatever came out. And then I would go and, whatever else I was doing in life, go do it. And then when I had the time again, I'd do the same thing, just sit down and wait for the story to come out.
That part at the end, you're trying to find justice and it's very frustrating. I think you also do just such a lovely job of showing that healing is not a straight line. Resolution is not a straight line. Justice is elusive, can be elusive, even if you do everything right.
Yeah.
And I just, as a reader, I feel really happy that you showed that it's not just like, you know what, I realized this thing from my childhood wasn't okay. And I'm all good now. We just dusted it off. That it's just, it's in there. It's a constant thing you have to kind of work against or work through or parse out. And then I don't know if it feels this way for you, but as a reader, it feels like there is some justice for your character or for your younger self in this secret being told in the light of day. And it feels like, as a person who may be one of those souls in the cave, it feels like you are like allowing a path to the sunlight for a lot of different people. So
I sure hope so. In a lot of ways, the search for justice didn't go the way I wanted it to. And so I was left after with really no resolution. And I guess I was hoping that the only good that could possibly come out of it was if I could kind of help other people a little bit and kind of explain to people who haven't been abused as children, some of the effects, and also to sort of tell the story for people that had, because the stages are the same. So it's sort of a way to tell other people's story. Because if somebody comes up to you and says, I was molested as a child, they're only telling you of this little moment in time. They're not telling you of all the betrayal that happened to happen before it and all the vulnerability. They're not telling you all the people that failed you in your life. So you had to turn towards this stranger who was ultimately a predator. And it's not telling you all the things that happened, all the relationship problems, money problems, isolation, all of the things that follow. It doesn't tell you about that, but I'm willing to bet that almost every person that was molested as a child has a big story of before and after. And when they walk up to you and tell you they were molested, they're not telling you the whole story. And I don't think that there was any way that I could heal without telling the whole story. How did this happen? What built up to it? And what happened after, and how did I ultimately come to terms with it? If any part of that story was still left inside me, I would not be, I don't know if healed is the right word, maybe made whole again would be the right way to put it. So if you do have, I guess what I'd ask anybody who has a friend who's been molested is maybe if they're comfortable, get them to tell you, not just what happened and say, oh, that's horrible, but to understand the before and the after, because that's only what the molesting part is only a bit of it. The rest of it, that story trapped inside you is going to eat away at you, and they need a way to get it out. Somebody has to listen to that story. I believe somebody's got to listen to it, or it just gnaws away at you forever. So I don't know if that makes sense, but
that makes perfect sense. As I was taking notes about your book, I was like, don't cry. Don't cry while you're interviewing Emily Carrington.
If you did, I'd feel really bad. So I'm glad. Please don't cry.
Just revisiting your book, just be like, hello, nice to meet you.
Oh.
But it's not like I feel bad. It's not like I'm like, oh, I feel bad for you. But it's just like it was so touching and it's so important. And everything you're doing is so huge. And I just really value it so much. And all ages of me value it so much.
Oh, well, thank you. I really appreciate your compliment.
You're welcome. Do you have any final advice for people that have a big story they want to tell in comics or anything before we wrap up?
If you have a big story, you might find that people aren't listening to you, and don't let that discourage you. You know, if you know you have a big story and you feel in your heart of hearts, just do it. Take any courses that you can. Something that might sound a bit odd, but take a poetry course, because comics are little. Each panel is like a line of a poem. And the imagery in comics, I think, is a lot like the imagery in poetry. You know, you've got images plus short lines. I found poetry immensely helpful, the poetry courses I took. And get a big giant stack of cheap paper and a pencil and just start, you know, don't agonize over the final detail. Just let the story come out and then figure it out later, I guess would be, well, that's the way I did it. Maybe everybody's got their own way, but I think learning about comics, learning about writing and poetry, and just letting your story out is the way to go.
I think that's perfect advice. I second this emotion, co-sign this advice, exact same advice.
Very good. Very good.
Emily Carrington, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for talking. And I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about this important topic.
Sagittarian Matters is produced by Chris Sutton, with assistance by Panyo Georges. Our theme music is composed by Carolyn Pennypacker Riggs of the band Bouquet. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.